Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are back today to continue our year in review series across each Blue Jays affiliate. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. We're excited to pick up the series once again after we recorded the first two, but of course had to take a little bit of a break from the series as the Blue Jays went on their World Series run. But excited nonetheless to head down to AAA Buffalo today. We are joined by Brian Frank of the Herd Chronicles and herdchronicles.com to break down all things Bisons. Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to do this today, and we're excited to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me. I love being here and I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I know a little bit of a different conversation this year than it was last year for Buffalo and for the Blue Jays minor league system as a whole. But before we kind of get into, some of the guys who made their way through Buffalo this year, you made your way through Toronto and LA for the World Series and kind of got the opportunity to cover that. What was that experience like for you? And how cool was it to be in the building for the World Series?
So, I mean, the experience, it was like a dream the whole time. It still hasn't settled in everything that happened, but being, at Rogers Center in that atmosphere and just, being kind of a baseball historian and just looking at that series. And honestly, while this series was being played, you realized how great it was. Like every single game has like a story. I mean, you can say, it was the Barger pinch hit grand slam game, or it was the Vladdy home run off Otani game, or the Yamamoto complete game. Like every game kind of has a storyline. And, while it was being played, I was like, this is amazing how every game really has like this one standout moment or standout performance, like the Trey Savage game. Everybody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So like being there, and then it was actually the first time I've ever been to Dodger Stadium,
Wow.
and being able to experience just being at Dodger Stadium for a World Series, and the Blue Jays are there, and it's like this incredible series was amazing. And then of course, you get back to Toronto, and everybody knows what happens game 6 and 7, and again, disappointment, but looking at it, and I don't even think there's recency bias when you look at it and say, this is in the conversation for greatest World Series of all time, not just of our lifetimes, but of all time. It's in the top 10 definitely, and much higher than that, maybe the best ever. It was amazing.
Yeah, and I mean, uniquely a bit of a Buffalo flavor to it. I mean, you look at basically up and down the Blue Jays lineup from A to Z, from Schneider to Barger, as you mentioned, to Davis Schneider to Eric Lauer, and everyone in between. A ton of Buffalo connections.
It was amazing. I think there were five of the seven World Series games, all 10 Blue Jays starters had played for the Bisons at some point in their career,
Wow.
either coming up through the system or rehabbing with Buffalo. Six of the 10 starters in those five World Series games, played in Buffalo this season. And that's including guys like, George Springer, who was here on rehab, and Shane Bieber, who was here on rehab, Scherzer. But, amazing connection, because then you have guys who weren't in Buffalo this season, but were here very recently and, made big contributions in Buffalo, like Nathan Lucas and Ernie Clement. So there really was a huge connection with Buffalo and the entire Blue Jays postseason roster. It was amazing.
I want to get into kind of the rehab experience and the experience that you had with some of those guys. But I mean, kind of before that, I mean, I think back to the beginning of the season when, guys like Eric Lauer and Braden Fisher and Mason Fluharty and Addison Barger, like all these guys started the year in
Yeah.
Buffalo. And it's incredible to think, how, for those like those four specifically, like how important that they were to the 2025 Blue Jays. I wonder for you being around guys like that who were in Buffalo to start the year. Like, kind of what was it about them? What was it about the experience in Buffalo that allowed them to come up and be ready to contribute to what was eventually, the AL pennant winner?
Yeah, Eric Lauer was actually the Bison's opening day starter,
Yeah.
and Addison Barger was their opening day shortstop, which is just, at this point, it's hard to believe. I think it's just kind of the atmosphere. I think Casey Candell is a big reason for that. I asked John Schneider kind of mid-season, you know, with so many guys coming up and making an impact from Buffalo, what was the reason for that? And the first words out of his mouth was, "Well, I love Casey Candell,"
Yeah.
and I think it's an organizational philosophy where they're really all on the same page. And I think when you talk about John Schneider and his growth as a manager, which we all saw this year,
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it too. Like, getting the organization on the same page, right down from the major leagues all the way down to single A, but especially magnified at triple A, having a guy like Casey Candell put guys in situations that maybe you wouldn't normally put a guy in triple A, whether it's laying down, if somebody like Jonathan Clase goes up to the major leagues, chances are he's not going to be hitting first or second right off the bat, and he might be hitting eighth or ninth and be asked to lay down a bunt. So when he's in AAA, maybe you ask him to do those kinds of things that he wouldn't normally be asked to do as like a leadoff batter in AAA. So it's getting guys ready for those situations that they're going to be in the major leagues. And I think Case Kendall's done an amazing job of that, not just this year, but the last few seasons when you look back at a couple of years ago with all the Buffalo boys coming up like
Yeah.
Spencer Horwitz and Davis Schneider and Ernie Clement. And it really, has been something that's been building over time and really kind of culminated this year with that postseason run.
I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit on our question doc here. I think timely with Casey Candell coming up, obviously for him, a really big season where he sets the Bison's modern era record for wins as a manager.
Yeah.
For you to kind of be able to like cover him for so much of his career in Buffalo and be around him, very cool, I would imagine, for him to have gotten that record and be in that spot. I wonder, you kind of mentioned it there, like why he's so good as a AAA manager, but like what was it like being around that moment for him to set that record and kind of, be this Bison's managerial legend?
Yeah, and he was a legend here in Buffalo before he even managed here because he actually played here on some of our
Right.
great teams in like the late 90s and um is such kind of a character of the game that everybody knew him and knew him as one of the leaders of those teams. Then he comes here to manage and he's the only Bisons go back to 1877 in different iterations of the team. They were in the National League for a while, and in the Players League and the Eastern League, but for most of the time they've been in the International League. He's the only person to ever play for a division winner here and then come back later and manage a division winner.
Wow.
And he's just such a awesome person to cover because I've said before to people, every time I talk to the guy, I learn something new about the game. He just has such like unique perspectives on everything, and whenever there's kind of like a rule change, like the ABS ball strike, the automatic ball strike system, or the automatic runner at second, I always make sure I go to talk to him about it because he kind of just has like these unique, looks at everything, and he has a great sense of humor, really down to earth, and I know definitely a player's manager. Like players love playing for him. He's kind of a minor league managing legend now, and guys know of him before they get here, and they really enjoy playing for him.
I want to ask a little bit kind of about the role he's played in, I guess, developing guys, right? You mentioned him being a player's manager. What kind of role would you say that he's ultimately had in the success of, even beyond the prospects, the Nathan Lucas types and the Ernie Clement types and other guys that maybe weren't expected to necessarily come up and be contributors and have found a way to be considerable parts of a Blue Jays team that made the World Series?
Yeah, I think that connection that he makes with players and he just loves the game and being around the game, and I think that rubs off on guys. Like you get all kinds of players in AAA. You're either on your way up or you're on your way down, or you're kind of stuck at AAA waiting for your opportunity. And it wasn't that long ago that Nathan Lucas was in Buffalo for quite a good chunk of time, even though he was putting up great numbers. He was the Bisons Player of the Year in 2022, I believe. And you know, kind of that love of the game rubs off on these guys. And one thing I always notice about Casey is he is the when they go out, they take infield before every game, which to me, all teams should do that, but I hear other like broadcasters and stuff commenting on like, geez, do you guys do this every day? And it's like, well, yeah, they do it every day. And so apparently other teams don't do it every day. But he's always the last guy off the field, like always the last guy off the field, like carrying the bucket of balls from infield or whatever. Um, Going over and mingling with the other team's manager and coaches. Like he's just that kind of guy that just loves the game. And I really think that affects not only the prospects coming up, but also maybe the more veteran guys who've had a little taste of Major League Baseball or, are in their late 20s or early 30s. And that kind of atmosphere doesn't get missed by the players that it's a love of the game and whether you're on your way up or fighting to get back. I think it really affects guys.
You mentioned kind of, like having that impact on players of all ages, of all types. You kind of had that in Buffalo this year, obviously. You have Trey Savage for a short period of time. We kind of already mentioned the rehabbers. I guess, for those guys who are rehabbing, I guess for you to get to see Max Scherzer and Shane Bieber and George Springer and Anthony Santander and Dalton Varsho and all these guys wearing Bison's jerseys this year. What was it kind of like to have so much of that like major league pedigree, all that all-star pedigree, Cy Young's pitching down there? And I mean, was there any of them that was, kind of a holy crap moment for you to kind of see them pitching in Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, you always have like some rehabbers coming here. Like every
Yeah.
year, you get a few guys. Like recently, we've had like Bo Bichette and Danny Jansen and Jordan Romano, and but this year it was just like a windfall of guys. Like I've never seen anything like it. And like you said, the Scherzer and Bieber, like you're getting these like former Cy Young winners. Bieber and Springer were actually here at the same time, which was kind of like a wow moment,
Yeah.
like the, having those guys in the lineup at the same time. And Scherzer was another wow moment, just because it's Max Scherzer, and
Yeah.
he did his post game interview with a scrum of local media, and it was like, wow, this is Max Scherzer, like I mean, just legendary. Probably the same impact that he had on all the Toronto writers in spring training
Yeah.
this. But you know, it really was something. And Santander at the end of the season was kind of cool too because you kind of knew that his goal was to get back and help the team. You weren't really. I knew that he could do it, but I didn't know if there was enough time for him to do it.
Right.
And I talked with him in Rochester right before he got called up. And I mean, he didn't come out and say it, but just kind of the vibe that I got from him was that he wanted to get back and help the Blue Jays, but I don't think he was really sure if he had enough time to do it too. He was like, the vibe from him was kind of like, I'm going to do my best and we'll kind of see what happens here.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, he was hitting the ball well in Buffalo here. He had one home run, but he ripped a couple other balls foul, that would have been home runs, but they were foul. And I thought when he got up to Toronto in the playoffs and stuff, he was really swinging the bat well too and working pitchers and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, it didn't work out with the back issue, but um, I, to me, that was amazing that he got to that point where he could go back and contribute in the playoffs like that after so much time off. So all the rehabbers here this year really had kind of unique, like Dalton Varsho was here for a bit, and again, that was amazing too. So this really was a unique year as far as Major League Rehab situation went.
I think on the other end of the spectrum, we'd be remiss if we didn't get to kind of the biggest story, I guess, in terms of the Blue Jays and prospect wise. Obviously, Trey Savage, who did make a stop in Buffalo, and albeit brief, I mean, obviously, he still was the Blue Jays' top prospect in Buffalo. Did you get the sense as he was making this ascent? Was it pretty clear, but even by that point, that this was a guy that was going to be striking out 12 guys in the World Series?
So like when he first got here, like looking at and reading about what he'd done at other levels, you kind of heard like, well, when he gets to a level, there might be a game or two where he kind of adjusts and then he kind of settles in and dominates, right? And he kind of did that a little bit in Buffalo too. Like you could see that first couple games kind of adjusting, and we have like the automatic ball strike
Right.
here, which kind of it really affects pitchers because you get a smaller strike zone, maybe a little bit lower strike zone than what they're used to. Um, so he kind of saw that adjustment. Then he pitched like one game of relief, and then his last two starts here were really good. And it was kind of those last two starts. He pitched like three shutout innings in both of them because they were holding his pitch count down. But that was kind of when I got the sense like, I really think he is going to help the big league club this year. I kind of thought it would be as a reliever at that point. I didn't think they would throw him in the fire like that as a starter. And certainly I never envisioned how everything actually turned out. But it was kind of those last few starts when I kind of got the vibe that like, this really could be something for this year for Toronto. But I mean, what ended up happening with even his regular season starts and his start against the Yankees and then to go on and do it in the World Series was mind blowing and amazing. And certainly I didn't foresee that.
Obviously, what he did, yeah, in the postseason in the World Series is without comparison. But I wonder for you to, be able to see him in Buffalo, is there kind of like any talent level comparisons or any guys that you've kind of seen come through there that like compares like talent level wise or just kind of the impact that they might have had during a short stint in Buffalo or any kind of period of time that they were there?
When I think recently on some of the big like Blue Jays pitching prospects that have come through here, and I'm thinking of like, I mean, Manoah was kind of in, he might actually be the closest comp, but when he was in Buffalo as a rising prospect, it's when the Bisons were in Trenton, so we didn't actually see
Right.
him in Buffalo at that time. But like Nate Pearson and Tiedemann was here briefly before he got hurt. I'd have to say that Savage was the most impressive, like on the field,
Yeah.
that anybody had been here in a while. But maybe Stroman too, if you go back that far. But the thing that really kind of stood out about him to me was, you saw this when he got to the big leagues too. Like he was just so comfortable. Like when
Yeah.
I interviewed him like the week before he went up to Toronto. And, he's 22 years old. It's his first year in professional baseball. But he was just so comfortable talking to me and just so relaxed and polished. And you could just tell that he was just a different mindset but then you saw that, like nothing fazed him when he got to the big leagues and then through the playoffs and the World Series. And he's sitting there in front of a giant room taking reporters' questions at the World Series and still just as comfortable as he'd ever been. I think that's the biggest thing that stood out for me, besides like the amazing stuff and the release point and everything that everybody knows about, but was just how professional he was and how relaxed he was, and just so, he seems like a 10-year major league veteran as opposed to a guy who was in college last year.
Do you think that professionalism is really kind of the maybe not the thing, but one of the major factors that allowed him to just transition so seamlessly?
I think it's a huge thing. I mean, obviously the stuff and the release point and all that. But I mean, if he'd have gone up and been overwhelmed by the situation, things would have turned out differently. And we've seen that with so many guys. And like I said, there was kind of, just reading about him, there might have been a little adjustment period for him at each level. There didn't seem to be that adjustment level when he got to the big leagues. So definitely that professionalism and that mindset helped him out there without a doubt.
This episode of the Bird's Eye View podcast is brought to you by BioSteel. Use code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order at biosteel.ca. Again, that's code Bird's Eye View at checkout for 20% off your order. For all your high performance hydration needs, visit biosteel.ca. Thank you again to BioSteel for sponsoring today's episode.
we can kind of shift, I guess, maybe more into like the prospecty type conversation. But you brought up Alek Manoah kind of in your comparison in his rise to the majors, and unfortunately for Alec, his Blue Jays tenure did come to an end this year, and you saw him a lot in Buffalo, kind of in the same vein as Manoah was Aurelvis Martinez's season in Buffalo. I kind of wondered for you seeing both of those guys this year kind of struggle, and obviously I think Manoah, like results wise, was pretty good in Buffalo, but not quite enough to get his way back to the majors. I kind of for you watching them, what went wrong for them this season that kind of led to the eventual releases and the end of their time with the organization.
Yeah, so Manoa, I mean, he had 7 starts here in Buffalo, and like you said, the results were there, 2.97 ERA, 30 strikeouts and 33 and a third innings pitched. It's tough when you're watching a guy like that coming off Tommy John because I know like his velocity might have been down a tick or two, but when I talk to guys who are coming back from Tommy John, like it takes guys different amount of times to come back, one thing. And, one of the things that was amazing about Shane Bieber this year is like another thing I hear from guys is like sometimes you go out and you have your good stuff and you're like, oh wow. But then the next start, all of a sudden you're kind of struggling with it again, or maybe struggling with location and you know, and a lot of it too is like getting that confidence back just to like let it all hang out when you're pitching because you're a little worried about the elbow or whatever. So to me, watching him, I was surprised when they let him go because it just seemed like a guy who had that kind of success before. Um, that you might give him a little bit longer leash in the next year, especially. Just because like I mean he looked fine in Buffalo, but besides maybe the velocity being down a little bit, but you know that might tick up again coming into spring training next year. So I was surprised about that. Going to a Relvis, he just could never really get uh after all that happened like last year with the suspension and everything, it's like he never really hit his stride again.
Yeah.
Um, Strikeouts obviously were a big problem with him. Uh, he had a huge number of strikeouts this year, but he hit 13 home runs, so the power was still there in 99 games. So when he hits the ball, it really goes. But he had 112 strikeouts and 394 plate appearances. So I think that was kind of maybe the issue, one of his issues, kind of the whole time. When you look at his career, he did have a lot of like, he's a streaky hitter. When he has his lows, he really had a lot of, he'd really go through times where he was only hitting like 100 something and then all of a sudden break out of it. But, I think at some point it becomes like a confidence issue as well and just kind of spirals. And so I know he signed with Washington Nationals,
Yeah.
so they're Rochester's their AAA affiliate, so we'll be seeing a lot of him next
Yeah.
year because Buffalo plays them quite often. So I would assume we'll be seeing a lot more of him. Hopefully, he could, a change of scenery will do him well, and he can take off there.
Yeah, definitely a guy that you kind of want to cheer for, just given the history he's got with the Blue Jays as a highly touted prospect. I do want to shift a tiny bit here to another second baseman that was with the Bisons and found his stride, that being Davis Schneider, because he obviously starts with the big league club, really kind of has things go sideways, and is really struggling to find what made him successful in 2023. Goes down to Buffalo, and it seems like comes back completely rejuvenated, renewed individual, and is ultimately able to be a significant contributor off the bench for the Blue Jays on the run to the World Series. And I want to hear a little bit about kind of the time he spent with the Bisons and when he was away from the spotlight, did anything particularly seem like it really changed? Was there any significant changes, or does it just seem like it was just a reset for him?
Yeah, that was the word I was going to use, reset. Like I think just one thing about David Schneider, I think he's always kind of a slow starter. I think it's tough to be a slow starter when you're at the major league level and to keep getting playing time and kind of battle through it. So I think coming to Buffalo, and he was kind of here for, a relatively significant amount of time. He was here for 38 games, so that's a big chunk of time. I think it was just kind of a reset for him to just be able to come here, maybe not have to worry about producing in order to keep playing, and just kind of relax. And this is a great place. Talking with Danny Jansen a couple years ago when he came here on rehab, he's like, you never want to be on rehab, but if you're going to be on rehab, this is the place to do it because of all the upgrades that the Blue Jays made when they were here in 2020 and 2021 with, new batting cages that they have in right field and just major league quality facilities that are here. So for a player like David Schneider to kind of take a step back and come here and reset here, it's a great place to be able to do that kind of thing. He's familiar with the staff, with like Casey Candell, with the field, with the city. And I think it just gave him like, a breath of fresh air and a place to play without all that pressure that you would have in the major leagues and just kind of reset. And we all saw, how that wound up with helping out at the end of the season and in the postseason. So yeah, he was when you look at the success stories of the year, I think you're talking about guys going up and producing like you talked about earlier with Mason Fluharty and Braden Fisher and all those guys, the rehabbers, but also a guy like Davis Schneider who reset here and went up and was able to contribute.
Kind of on the same, success story, narrative, I guess would kind of be some of the guys who came up to Buffalo and succeeded. Kind of, I think of RJ Schreck and how well he hit in AAA after getting his promotion, and Yohendrick Pinango, kind of, flashing some of the power. I think he probably hit the ball a little bit better than his final results showed. But I
Yeah.
mean, for those two guys, like if you're looking at kind of guys who were helium prospects for the Blue Jays in 2025. Like both of them were kind of at the top of the list. What did you kind of see from them during their time? And, are these guys that we could be talking about next season as guys who impacted the Major League club?
Yeah, those are two guys who I'm really looking forward to watching next year. Um, Pinyango, like you said, one thing or the first thing really that stands out about him to me is like exit velocity. Like there's some guys who come through here, and obviously like Vladdy is one of them with exit velocity that you just watch when you're like, wow. Like Barger was another guy when he was here. I was like, and I'm not comparing Pinyango to those two guys because those guys are off the charts when it comes to exit velocity, but he's another guy who like just hits the ball hard. And it was his first go around here at AAA. So I'm really interested to see where he goes. He ended up with 15 home runs overall between here and New Hampshire, so he's got some pop, and he's definitely a guy who I could see, uh, breaking out next year and helping in Toronto, as maybe like a fourth or fifth outfielder. RJ Schreck's another guy who showed a lot of good things here. He ended up with 18 home runs overall between here and New Hampshire. So again, he's got pop too. He kind of had a lot of little nagging injuries throughout the year. I think he had some illness like the flu early on, and then he had like a hand injury and kind of a lot of little nagging things and still produced. So he's another guy and who I'm looking forward to seeing like how he contributes next season now that he's had this taste of AAA, and without a doubt could be a guy who goes up and helps out in Toronto as well.
I want to ask about Riley Terada as well, because, obviously he gets named as the team MVP at the end of the year. Kind of a guy who posted almost every day for the Bisons, 116 games, the power threat. There was kind of, some calls for him to get the promotion to Toronto kind of in the early summer-ish, with how well he was producing. And, it's kind of the type of guy that you want to root for, kind of along the lines of a lot of these Blue Jays prospects who make it up a little bit when they're older. But I mean, for you having had him in AAA for a couple years now, what did you kind of see that allowed him to be this team MVP type player who was out there so often and playing multiple positions?
Well, first of all, just a great guy, really personable and just a guy you want to root for. The thing that stands out about him to me last season was just kind of consistency. Um, he was there all season long and just kind of like that consistent bat in the lineup. It was like his first full year at AAA, and you could see that. And then, like you said, kind of the flexibility position wise. I think he's like an infielder by trade, but he can play third base, first base, a lot of left field last year. So he kind of has that flexibility that the organization likes so much. But just a really great guy, just a consistent bat throughout the year, and that consistency helped them put together a big full season. So that was really nice to see. And he definitely is a guy that I could see helping out in Toronto next season. Absolutely.
Another guy that has kind of been tabbed as a potential call it call up option for next season. Made his way over halfway through the year, Brandon Valenzuela. I want to hear a little bit about him because we've heard a lot in Toronto about him being a potential significant defensive contributor. Uh, Very kind of mature behind the plate, I think is the word. When he did make his way over, obviously at the deadline, what was your kind of sense of him, and do you see him being a guy that has the chance to be even a backup potentially as early as next season?
Yeah, so the first thing that jumps out about him is to me was his arm, like throwing to the bases. Really a great arm, and um, he's a guy who, like, I mean, I think it's obviously tough for any guy to change organizations at the deadline. I think it's got to be even more so for a catcher, to come in and kind of get the organizational philosophy on how you want pitchers to pitch, to learn all these guys on a new staff. And you got guys coming in here like Bieber and Scherzer and Manoa, and then you got young guys, and then you Savage, and so I mean, it's got to be tough to come in to a new situation like that. But he did great defensively. Switch hitter too, which obviously, very valuable to have a switch hitting catcher. So I'm really excited to see what he can do next year. He's got some pop too in his bat. He only hit 3 home runs in Buffalo, but he had 12 in San Antonio out in the PCL before coming here. So he finished with 15 home runs. So he kind of has unique splits because when he bats right-handed, he has a higher average. He had 261 right-handed, but only 4 home runs. When he hits left-handed, he had a lower batting average, 210, but he had 11 home runs. So he's got more pop batting left-handed. But I'm definitely really excited to see what he's going to do next season. He's 25 years old, so I don't know if they'll be comfortable like making him the backup right out of spring training because he's new to the organization and everything, and kind of a young guy. Um, Perhaps, but I definitely think he's going to be an option for them throughout the year, at some point. So it's really going to be exciting to see like how he develops next year, having like a full spring training in the organization and seeing where that takes him.
Yeah, the catching situation this year was like kind of so interesting for the Blue Jays. I mean, obviously Ali Sanchez got a quite a bit of time with Buffalo certainly, but also with the Blue Jays, and then with Kirk's injury and Heineman's injury, kind of both of them spending time in Buffalo as well. So having that third option, and I guess for Valenzuela to kind of be like that solidified option instead of like bringing in one of these veteran guys like Sanchez or Christian Bethancourt,
Right.
will be interesting to see kind of how that works out. I wanted to ask, kind of along the lines of the Riley Tiradas, obviously Andrew Bash, pitcher of the year in Buffalo yet again. Kind of death taxes and Andrew Bash posting an
Yeah.
ERA under 3 in Buffalo at this point. I know he elected free agency earlier this offseason, but for you, it's a guy who feels like if he was in a different organization, he may have earned his shot at the big leagues with how well that he has pitched at AAA. What did you kind of see from him this year? And do you think maybe there's going to be we're going to see Andrew Bash in the majors next year with wherever he lands?
Yeah, another guy who's just a great guy, and like a great org guy that they've had. Like he was actually signed out of the Pioneer League in 2021. He was playing
Wow.
independent ball, so it's like a great success story in that way. The first um, pitcher ever in the Bisons modern era, which goes back 1985, to win the pitcher of the year 2 seasons in a row. And he's just been so consistent. The year before that, he started out in New Hampshire and came up to Buffalo and had a great year too. So it's really 3 years in a row that he's had really nice seasons here. Um, the other thing that really stands out about him though is just his that makes him really valuable is his ability. to go between the starting rotation and the bullpen. Like he just does it seamlessly. Like this year he was kind of in the bullpen for most of the year, but making some spot starts, kind of can be like the bulk guy out of the bullpen when you need him to be, and so valuable. He's 29 years old now. Kind of reminds me in some ways like Paxton Schultz in that way, because Paxton
Right. Yeah.
Schultz has kind of been like that here the last few years with being able to seamlessly go between the rotation and the bullpen and stuff. And he finally got his opportunity in the big leagues this year and made a lot of it. So hopefully Bash, like you said, wherever he ends up, hopefully it's in Toronto. But if it's elsewhere, like good for him. But he definitely deserves that big league shot. So hopefully that's coming soon for him.
Yeah, definitely, definitely another one of those guys that you want to root for, just with the kind of the grind of being a minor leaguer and all the success that he's had.
Yeah.
Kind of, I guess moving on through the guys that you saw this year, I guess a couple more that got big league time but spent the majority of their seasons in Buffalo were Joey Loperfido and Jonathan Clase. I think that, obviously there's an age gap there, but kind of similar buckets for maybe where they stand in the organization. What did you kind of think of their development this year? I think obviously a big year for both of them as far as, trying to figure out where they stand in the organization and what kind of player that they can be going forward.
Yeah, both those guys looked really good here. It was nice to see Loperfido be able to contribute so much at the end of the year. Class A
Yeah.
kind of got his shot in the big leagues a little bit earlier this year, but they both look great. Class A, of course, a switch hitter, which is another like valuable asset that he brings, and all his speed to the big leagues. He was 30 out of 34 stealing bases this year. And you just kind of watch those guys, and Toronto had so much outfield depth this year, especially with
Yeah.
like Miles Straw, the season that he had, and then like Lucas and Schneider and everything. So it's hard for these guys to push their way up unless there's an injury or something that gets them up there, which there were some this year. But yeah, both of them look great, and like it got to like leading into the trade deadline. I was like, wow, there's really like this glut of outfielders because
Yeah.
they had Alan Roden and Will Robertson at the time too, and you know Roden spent a lot of time in the big leagues contributing this year. Robertson was probably the Bisons MVP up to that point. I mean, he was having a huge year, and I was like, it just seemed like that would be a position that they were able to deal from because they had so much depth there. And sure enough, like Roden and Robertson both got traded. So yeah, obviously either one of those guys, Loperfido or Clase, could be in the big leagues next year contributing because of the way they played this year, and it just kind of seems like it's time for them to push up and be in the big leagues.
Just moving right along, kind of on the pitching side as well, in a similar vein, maybe not as much big league experience, but a number of guys kind of knocking on the door or have maybe cameoed as well. I mean, we've got it written down in our rundown. We got Adam Macko, Laz Estrada, and then slightly different but similar. You got CJ Van Eyck, and then obviously Adam Kloffenstein, who returned to the org after a couple of years with St. Louis. Of that group, who impressed you the most?
Um, well, I think Estrada with what he did in the big leagues when he got his shot there and that,
Yeah.
and yeah. So I mean him as far as big league, you know, Adam Macko, I'm really interested kind of to see what he does next year because it was his first year in AAA and he injured his knee in spring training, if you remember, so he got kind of a late start. Like he didn't get to Buffalo until June. Um, he's kind of got, obviously like the unique background coming from Slovakia and living in Ireland for a little bit and then making his way to Alberta. But he seemed like a lot of his starts, and I don't have data for this, just kind of my own eyes, that it was just kind of like bad luck. Like there was one game earlier in the year against Lehigh Valley, I think it was, where uh, he had this one inning where there was like a swing and bunt kind of couple of swing and bunt kind of hits, a couple other infield hits, and there might have been a blooper or error in there. And I was like, man, he's given up like 4 or 5 runs this inning, and he hasn't been one hard hit ball. There's been like one ball that left the infield. So he kind of had some hard luck early on, and now that he kind of has that AAA experience, I'm kind of interested to see where he goes next year. Left-handed pitcher. He's only 25 years old, or I think he's about to turn 25. So he's kind of an interesting guy to watch next year, I think.
What did you kind of make of, he had like such a strong finish to the season once he moved to the bullpen? Do you think that there was kind of anything that changed for him between when he was starting versus when he was coming out of the pen?
It's hard to say. Like, I think sometimes with a lot of guys like that, that's kind of like a reset for them. Like when they, have the grind of being a starter and just kind of going to the bullpen, they can kind of just like refocus and maybe, fall back on their best two or three pitches and just kind of reset like that. So you kind of see that with a lot of guys, because they do that fairly often here in Buffalo, where if a guy's struggling, they'll move him to the bullpen for a little bit and then
Yeah.
put him back in a starting role. So that could have been for him just kind of like looking at that as like a reset and yeah, but you there's definitely guys who have done that this year, like Van Eyck had a couple bullpen appearances. Trenton Wallace was used out of the bullpen a lot more this year, so you definitely see that a lot here.
Yeah. Well, will be interesting to see what he looks like in 2025 or 2026, I guess.
Yeah.
For sure. We've thrown a lot of names at you, Brian, kind of coming from our side, but I kind of want to give you a chance to run with the ball a little bit. Like, I mean, who are some of the guys that we haven't asked you about that really stood out to you as positive contributors with the Bisons this year and guys that, Blue Jays fans should know going forward?
Just thinking about guys who we didn't talk about. One guy who stood out defensively this year majorly was Josh Rivera.
Yeah.
Like his arm at shortstop is just incredible. Like it's like Addison Barger-esque.
Wow.
His arm, like that's how hard he throws. And you know, he's improved some offensively. Like he hit 226 this year. But if he could bring his average up a little bit, like I mean, if he's like a could hit like 250 in the majors with his arm and his defensive ability, he's a guy who could really stand out. Um, there were a lot of guys this year that I was really looking forward to seeing this year in Buffalo who weren't here because of injuries. Josh Kasevich was kind of,
Yeah.
in 2024, he was a guy who I saw in 2025, like making the jump and helping the Blue Jays like that. He was so impressive here. Not only on the field with the numbers he put up, which were great, but there's just something about him that like I saw it when Ernie Clement was here too. Like just this like leadership quality about him where other players seem to follow him. Like he just has like a presence when he's on the field. And I was really looking forward to seeing him this year, but he was injured and but he could be a guy next year to
Yeah.
keep an eye on. Leo Jimenez was another guy who I expected to make big contributions in Toronto this year, but unfortunately had a lot of injuries and illness at the beginning of the year. So some of the guys who I was looking forward to seeing in 2025, I'm still looking forward to seeing in 2026, And the rotation too, when you look at what Buffalo's rotation could have been this year, at
Yeah.
least for a bit, with like Ricky Tiedemann, Jake Bloss, Chad Dallas, and all the guys had Tommy John surgery. So, I think Tiedemann and Dallas will both be back next year. Obviously, Tiedemann's big time on the Toronto fans' radar.
Yeah.
So we'll see, and Bloss may be back like later on in the year, but so we'll see. Those guys obviously are big to watch next year too for what they could do here in Buffalo and what they could do in Toronto as well.
It's an exciting time for the Blue Jays farm system in general, and I think Buffalo next year will certainly be, um, among the most interesting clubs with some of this low minors talent that they have, probably pushing their way up to Buffalo. So, should be fun. It's always fun when we get to have you on, Brian. Appreciate you taking the time to do this today and hopping back on for our year in review. Hopefully, we'll run it back next year, but. Thanks for all your insight, all your coverage, and always enjoy following along with your work throughout the season.
Absolutely, I love being here. If we do it again next year, hopefully we'll have less rehab or talk because there won't be a ton of
Yeah.
injuries. And but I love being here. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, I always appreciate it. That is Brian Frank at the Herd Chronicles. You can find him on Twitter at Herd Chronicles. You can find his work at herdchronicles.com. And this year he started up the Conversations with the Herd podcast, which is a great way to hear from some of the players down in Buffalo. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening along on the audio provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. You can follow us all on Twitter. I am at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Negin-Shecter, and the pod is at BEV_pod. Thank you so much for listening.